Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Hollywood Memories. I'm Dan Roberts. I'm the publisher of The Vegas Voice, and I have the great honor and privilege of working with my favorite actress, the other woman in my life, and that is Beverly Washburn.
Thank you.
Beverly, again, thank you so much for putting up with me.
Well, it ain't easy at times.
I know.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
No, thank you for having me, and thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
We're going to do a segment in which you talked about this gentleman once before, but we really never did an entire segment on him. And he is probably one of the greatest comedians in the United States ever. And yet many people really are, my son's age, had no idea who he is. And we're talking about, of course,
Jack Benny.
And you have a long history with Jack Benny. But let's just go by his character. What kind of a guy was he?
You know, Dan, I have to say, and I know I always seem to say this because you tease me about it like he's my favorite, but he truly, I mean, as far as looking back over my lifetime and my memories and the people that I was blessed to work with, Jack Benny, I can't say enough about him. He was just such an amazing human being, kind, generous, thoughtful, funny. He was the best. And I was fortunate that, you know, I worked with him the first time when I was like 7 or 8 years old.
We're going to go into that. But in all the time, I mean, his reputation was he was cheap. He was very cheap. And I guess he really wasn't like that.
Well, that's hilarious, really, because probably of all the people I've ever known, he was probably one of the most generous people in the entire world. And not just with, you know, gifts or that kind of generosity, but he was, you know, a lot of comedians want to have the punchline always. He was generous in a way that he didn't have to have the punchline. He would let the other person get the laugh because he could just do his, you know, his famous take where he'd do, you know, that look that nobody else could ever imitate as well as he really did it. And he was just, his timing was impeccable, and he was just so thoughtful and generous, and it's just funny that he played the stingy Taiwan.
Well, not only that, but he was famous for playing a musical instrument in which he really wasn't, when he did it on stage, he was horrible.
Right.
And it was the violin.
And he was a wonderful violinist.
He really knew how to play the violin.
He sure did.
Okay, now let's go down memory lane. Okay. You go back with him, I'm going to give you the date, November 30, 1952, and that was a segment called...
I'm really old, aren't you?
You know, even I was surprised. And it was called Jack Gets Robbed. And talk a little bit about that, because you play a character by the name of...
Margaret Truman.
And it was important, remember, if you can remember that far back, is that Margaret Truman was the daughter of the President of the United States, Harry Truman. Right. So set us up. What was the plot?
Well, this was the famous Jack Benny show, and the episode was called Jack Gets Robbed, but people never saw that. That was just basically on the script, but they never, you know, had the title of the episode. But it was just the Jack Benny show. And so in this little bit, I'm sitting in the audience with my mother. I was planted, as they called it. So the audience didn't know that I was part of the act. They thought that I was really part of the audience. And during his monologue, I get up out of my chair and walk up on stage and ask for his autograph.
Just walk right up on stage.
Right.
And nobody knew who you were. And you walk up on stage and you ask Jack Benny for his autograph.
Right. Yeah.
And, I mean, the audience must have been shocked that this little girl just went right on stage.
Right. Well, what you don't see when you're watching it, because you can get it, I guess, on YouTube. Or wherever, there was an orchestra pit. So they had, you know, the orchestra sitting there, and they were instructed that as I get up off my chair to go up on the stage, to kind of pretend like they're trying to stop me, like, no, little girl, that type of thing. So the audience thought it was a legitimate bit and that I was really getting out of my seat to go up there. And then we do this little thing where I ask for his autograph, and it turns out my name was Margaret Truman.
Okay, but again, I mentioned it before, and I'm going to mention it again and again. This was on live TV. You screwed up. That's all there is to it.
Right.
And yet you did it. And I mean, you have to see the segment. You were in character. Weren't you nervous about being in front of all those people and the cameras and everything?
No, I think I was just too young to be, and I don't know. No, I wasn't.
You weren't phased at all.
No, but funny. He was actually telling me years later that he had taken a chance on me because it was my first time that I had ever done live TV. And back in the days of live TV, now they do live shows, but they have the capability of bleeping something out if it goes wrong. Back then, it went on as you did it. So even if a light would fall down or the scenery would fall over, whatever happened went on the air. And so he was really taking a chance on me because I had quite a bit of dialogue. And we had rehearsed it with no audience.
Right.
So he told me years later, he said, I was really taking a chance on you. And if you watch the little segment, you'll notice that there are a few times where he's kind of stuttering. And he told me it was because he was really nervous, because he was afraid, like, what happens if I would forget my lines or all of a sudden get stage fright, because we never had done it in front of an audience. And he didn't know how I might react to that. And then he said, or worse, he said, if I forgot my line, that could throw you off. And he said, I was really taking a chance, but fortunately it all went smoothly.
And when you did those lines and, they asked, what's your name, Margaret, last name Truman, where do you live, Washington,
Right.
D.C., did you have any idea what the script was about?
I had no clue. The audience would be laughing, and I didn't really understand why they were laughing because I was too young to know who Harry Truman was or Margaret Truman. I didn't get any of the jokes, so that's why I didn't laugh, and I wondered why the audience was laughing so much.
And you weren't thrown off by the fact that the audience was laughing. It was really a very funny bit.
It is pretty funny.
And Jack Benny was excellent when the crowd was laughing. He would just pause.
Well, he would do that famous take of his where only he could do.
Only he can do.
Yeah.
And that was just as funny, if not funnier. And you never broke character.
No.
It just wasn't an issue. And again, you didn't understand the dialogue, so I guess you didn't go to Jack Benny and say, look, Jack, this line is wrong or that's line. You just did exactly what they said.
I just memorized my dialogue and said it. And it was really fun. He was such a nice man.
And I know he really was in your life the entire time.
Yeah.
And then after that, there was your 21st birth, your 18th birthday, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, he gave you,
that hairdo.
And there's the hairdo, but there's a picture with you cutting the cake. Yeah. And he gave you a birthday gift. You still have, I believe.
I do. It's right here.
Yeah.
I brought it to show you. This is a St. Christopher.
And it's funny, he gave you a St. Christopher medal, and on the back, and I'm holding it, is to Beverly with love, Jack Benny.
Yeah.
And yet, you're not Catholic, and he was Jewish.
Right, I know. I don't know why he picked a St. Christopher, but it was such a nice gesture.
It's a beautiful thing.
He was just very generous, and then he gave me these pearls another birthday. And at Christmas time, he would send flowers. Excuse me. He was just the most generous, thoughtful person. And it was just funny that he would portray the tightwad.
Yeah. And then following it up, he also sponsored you for the Deb Star Ball. Talk a little bit about that because no one knows about that now.
Well, they don't do it anymore. They did it for a few years, and it wasn't a beauty contest or anything like that. It was basically, it was the Makeup and Hairdressers Union that would select, like, girls that they thought would go on to do something or whatever, and they would nominate, and then they would vote on it. And so, as you can see in the photo, Raquel Welch was one of the girls, and Barbara Parkins, who was in Valley of the Dolls and Dynasty, I think it was, and Marianne Mobley, who had been Miss America, and Donna Lauren, who was a popular singer back in the 60s.
And you had some hot babes on that. and yet, the sponsor, your sponsor was?
Jack Benny.
Jack Benny.
Yeah, every girl had to have a sponsor, and it could be a movie star, a famous personality, a studio, a production company, or whatever.
So when you were with all these ladies, no fighting, no cat fighting, right? No one tried to do anything.
No, it was a really lovely bunch of ladies. We all got along great. And then the fun part is that each of us got an escort, and they would assign an escort to each of us. And I got lucky because mine was Bill Bixby.
And he was the guy, my favorite Martian, I guess, at that time. And he was your date, your escort, right?
Yeah, and it wasn't a real date, of course, although he did take me out to dinner afterward, which is
I
really
mean, we're not
nice.
talking like In-N-Out Burger. You went to a real place, right?
It was a really,
Yeah.
on the Sunset Strip in Hollywood. But no, we would come from opposite ends of the stage. The girls would come on one side and the men would come on the other side. And then they would have this big bouquet of roses that they would present to us. And then we would walk down the plank, so to speak. And then the host of the show was George Gobel, the comedian.
The comedian, yeah.
And then he would ask each girl a question. And I think my answer was world peace.
World peace, right? Like everything else, huh?
I don't even remember what my question was. It's been so long ago. But it was quite fun.
All right, and then further on, and back in, again, in 1968, you did the Hollywood Palace with Jack Benny. Mm-hmm. And it was a bit called The
Smithers Sisters. It was a very funny, just a slapstick, silly act. And the photo that you have there, that was when we did it on the Hollywood Palace. We also were here in Vegas at the Sahara.
Isn't that
and
something?
We played Tahoe, and then we toured all over the East Coast in, I guess it was 1971.
71, yeah.
And so we played this really, it's also online. You can see it. This group that were terrible singers.
And it was genuinely funny. You can say whatever you want. You could not possibly do that now on TV.
No, it would be considered not very nice, like
not politically correct.
Yeah, but it was all in fun. And what you're talking about is the one on the right over there. Yeah. That was Peggy Mondo, a wonderful actress. And throughout the whole thing, she's saying that her feet hurt and,
she was hungry.
And she was, yeah, and he would make jokes about her weight, which is very inappropriate, but it was all in fun back then. And people just laughed because it wasn't meant to hurt anybody.
Okay, so you had the heavy set one. Mm-hmm. You had the nasty one in the middle. And your character was
kind of the ditzy one.
Kind of.
You think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But all in fun.
All in fun, yeah.
All right. So looking back on all this, final thoughts about Jack Benny.
All I can say is that, looking back, I just feel so blessed, so fortunate to have worked with him, because when I got the part as Margaret Truman, because I had to go and read, audition for it, I didn't have a clue who Jack Benny was. Of course, my parents were over the moon because they were huge fans of his, but I didn't know who he was. And so for me, it wasn't about working with Jack Benny, because I didn't get, how famous he was, but just working with this wonderful man. And because it fortunately went off without a glitch, he just kind of took me under his wing, so to speak. Yeah. And I worked with him again in Arizona. We did another silly little act, and he had me on his radio shows. And so it was a lifelong friendship. And to this day, I just look back and realize how fortunate I was. Sadly, as you mentioned earlier, in today's world, the younger generation, they don't know who.
Not a clue. Really, unfortunately, not a clue.
I know.
But if you think you were fortunate working with Jack Benny, consider how lucky and fortunate I am that I get to sit here with you and do this every so often until she yells at me. So, Beverly, as always, I thank you so much for putting up with me. This is Dan Roberts for Hollywood Memories, and we'll see you again. And thanks again.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks, everybody.